The gold rush is over. These are words by Casey Yano, co-founder of studio Big Crit, which you'll likely know as the developers behind hit indie titles Slay the Spire, to describe the current climate around Game Pass and Epic Game Store funding deals, and how those have dramatically shifted over the last year. Previously, funding deals from both Epic and Xbox would be an exchange, large sums of money to help games get across the finish line in exchange for exclusivity windows or content offerings via Game Pass or the Epic Game Store to their customers. Indie developers are not nearly as well funded by nature as the bigger fish in the industry, so deals like this really matters to developers getting their games finished, let alone becoming successful. Yano recounts in this interview from March 2024 at GDC that, quote, "I talked to at least 5 small teams, like 35 members and under, during GDC, and they're like, cuts, funding cancelled, talks that were going on for a year, cancelled." What makes this interview particularly interesting is what it may signal when you look at comments by head of GameIndustry.biz Chris String, who also spoke to developers and publishers last month at GDC. During the GameIndustry.biz podcast, where Dring makes these comments, he speaks to what he's heard while attending the conference and mentions rumblings and rumors of a decreased focus on Game Pass from Microsoft. While both Yano and Dring are just two people who are speaking to two different issues related to funding deals and Game Pass content offerings, it seems quite plausible Microsoft isn't necessarily moving away from Game Pass as a core part of its business strategy, but moving away from the reliance of third-party content to bolster the service's appeal. And one could argue this is bullish for the service and the output for Microsoft overall. Since the Xbox One generation, first-party output from Microsoft has been its Achilles heel, and partly why Nintendo and PlayStation have dominated the market in both hardware and software sales. With its acquisition of Bethesda/ZeniMax and its completed acquisition of Activision Blizzard late last year, it may be that Microsoft sees its future output hitting a more regular cadence and that this will allow it to focus on its first-party content offering as the main delivery of content for the service, and something that will allow it to reduce its cost basis for Game Pass by focusing less on third-party content. Hence what Yano is speaking to when he talks about Xbox being less interested in, say, funding third-party deals, at least based on the teams he spoke to at GDC. The alternate view, though, was one we should consider, and that is that Game Pass has had a negative feedback loop for game sales, and this has caused third-party developers/publishers to question moving forward with supporting the platform. And this is something Chris String recounts hearing from at least one major publisher and one developer when visiting GDC in March. Have a listen.
New hardware usually gives a bit of a boost, but...
Well, it's interesting with Xbox, because that's the other thing I heard. I heard it from a very prominent company, and one not so prominent, was Xbox's performance in Europe is just flatlining. And you can follow our monthly coverage in the games market. You can see that Xbox sales are falling, and it's been falling. It fell all throughout last year, and it's falling even harder this year. The phrase one major company who released a big game last year said, "I don't know why we bothered supporting it." But it's interesting. I was watching Michael Pactor's podcast, and he was talking about how it's all about Game Pass for Xbox. Yeah, I actually was hearing that Microsoft's putting a little bit less focus on Game Pass. So who knows? I think they'll tell you it's a bit of everything, and it probably is.
Now, Chris mentions the Series S and X version of games, and that having historically been a point of contention for some ports, as Microsoft has in the past stipulated that feature parity between Series S and Series X versions of Xbox games are required, but Microsoft has alleviated this issue on a case-by-case basis as we've seen in the past. Now, as for who this mystery publisher and developer are, it's hard to say. The major publishers that come to mind are EA, Ubisoft, and Take-Two. And I suspect Take-Two with GTA and the 2K games make plenty of money on the platform, that they wouldn't be questioning their support for it. It's possible it's Ubisoft or EA, but both of these publishers support Xbox even outside games on Game Pass, with their additional services in Ubisoft Plus and EA Play on the platform. Personally, I think that this publisher in question may be Bandai Namco, who publish From Software's games, the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm series, and many other traditionally Japanese-developed games. Xbox and its relationship to Japan and JRPGs has been a fraught one, and not necessarily due to its own fault. Final Fantasy games make it to the platform, but often in a delayed capacity given Sony's continued timed exclusivity deals with the likes of Square Enix. Still, this is just my guess as to who the publisher may be. It would need to be someone who isn't seeing the success they might want to see on the platform, where the sales continue to be predominantly focused on PlayStation, PC, and other platforms like Nintendo. As for the developer in question, we have a key clue Chris mentions, and that is that the developer released one of the biggest games of the year last year during 2023. For many, this comment from Dring makes us think of none other than Larian Studios, developers of 2023's Game of the Year, Baldur's Gate 3. This game was initially only available on PC in an early access capacity, and then eventually on PlayStation 5, but an Xbox port wasn't released at the same time as, say, the full PC and PlayStation versions. Larian previously was having trouble with some feature parity for the Series X and S version of the game, particularly in the couch co-op functionality on the Series S version. This prompted disappointment from Xbox fans who were looking forward to playing the game, and the game did eventually make its way to Xbox consoles last year on December 8th, 2023. We know as of late February that Baldur's Gate 3 has gone on to sell 10 million copies. This is most certainly weighted heavily from PC sales, followed by PlayStation and Xbox sales. Still, the Game of the Year would still sell a lot of copies on Xbox, you would think. So if it is them or any of the other developers for one of the biggest games last year, as Dring mentions, why wouldn't they sell well on Xbox? Why would they question their support for the platform? Well, as mentioned previously, there is an unfortunate reality when it comes to Game Pass and the effect it has on sales and consumer spending. Imagine the kind of user who plays games on Xbox and is a core user of Game Pass. This is a value-driven consumer where $15 a month gets you everything and anything Microsoft or its suite of studios publish. This content is expected and always available, and as of now, this extends to some third-party games as well. Exoprimal, a catalog of Ubisoft and EA titles as previously mentioned, Bethesda's games, Remnant 2 from last year, Persona 3 Reload, Lies of P, and even future games from GSC Game World like Stalker 2, and what we eventually will see in the newest iterations of Call of Duty, likely with Call of Duty 2024. A lot of content has made its way to Game Pass both from Microsoft and third parties through partnerships and even acquisitions, and these titles still span the biggest publishers and developers in the industry. When a second and third party title is announced for Xbox as a platform, the first question that usually follows is almost always if it's coming to Game Pass or not. It's a natural question. People want the most value they can get from the service, and that manifests in requests and hopes that new games are included in the service. The issue, though, is a game on Game Pass is a game that isn't going to sell well in the way of a la carte game sales. And this is an even worse scenario when you consider that Xbox is the worst performing platform in terms of game sales, even without the Game Pass effect on sales, given their market position against the likes of PlayStation and Nintendo. The good news in many cases, and especially for games like, say, Exoprimal, which weren't breakout success stories for Capcom, is that Microsoft historically has paid big money to get these games on the service. Which brings us back to the points from Casey Yano. What is a developer or publisher to do if the juice isn't worth the squeeze in developing Xbox ports of games, and that Game Pass money dries up for third-party content, or if they are historically lower than what they used to be in the past? These problems aren't new. They have existed since Game Pass launched, and have only gotten worse over time, but recent events like Microsoft's decision to sell games elsewhere is only going to make this effect worse. If you're a consumer who is committed to one platform, and there are people who are committed to just one platform, whether that be for preference of content, or the reality of the cost of trying to play games on multiple devices that cost multiple hundreds of dollars, such as the Series S, the X, the PlayStation 5 digital or disc version, does the recent decision to remove the barriers for the exclusive games you may have chosen Xbox for in the past not impact your future decisions on where you might play, or make you question if you should migrate platforms? For some, the answer is no. They prefer this platform, they would prefer to engage with this ecosystem, they like the OS, their friends are all here. This probably won't sway their decision. But I think for some, the answer is that yeah, it probably will. And this isn't necessarily only affecting Xbox. Sony also publishes games on PC, just in a more staggered state. Games like Final Fantasy VII Remake are also on PC. Same with God of War 2018, Horizon Forbidden West, and Horizon Zero Dawn. Ghost of Tsushima was recently released on PC, and Spider-Man 2018 and Miles Morales, and the future versions of these games will likely also appear on the platform. As well, timed exclusives like Final Fantasy XVI are also on the way to PC, and will probably see their way to Xbox as well. The key difference though is that these are delayed ports and delayed releases on other platforms, which softens the effect of, say, people migrating to a platform that might get everything, knowing that these games are usually years down the road after their initial release, which I think helps retain the stickiness of users on the PlayStation platform. Still, this change in strategy is most precarious for Xbox because it is pushing games everywhere, whereas Sony is only doing so on PC and in a delayed fashion. The situation Xbox finds itself in is that hardware is clearly going to continue, and so is Game Pass. We've seen the comments from Sarah Bond and Matt Booty stating as such for both future hardware and future Game Pass games that these are core pillars of what the Xbox business is trying to deliver for their fans and for audiences as they try to grow the business. But will people still want Xbox hardware when games are everywhere else and not required? And is Game Pass going to be compelling enough on its own without as big of an emphasis on third-party content? Will Microsoft be able to get its first-party software cadence to such a regular and streamlined degree and in a well-oiled fashion that it will retain its users, potentially without the third-party content we've seen it rely on in the past? Or is Game Pass de-emphasized, as Chris String speaks to, that it's a deliberate strategy shift away from what it's currently offering, and not just what I believe it to be, which is a de-emphasis on third-party content, but not a de-emphasis of the service as a whole? I think it's fair to say that greater than 95% of Xbox gamers on consoles have Game Pass. I think it's one of the best features Microsoft has introduced from a value perspective. And if that value goes down because there's a reduced focus on some content, even if it's just third-party games, do you stay on the platform while games move elsewhere to an ecosystem like PC or PlayStation, which by nature is getting the games of the other platforms? These are questions consumers in the industry are asking themselves, and it makes sense that publishers and developers are also asking them, whether it be speaking to Chris Dring or anybody else. Do these developers and publishers continue to support this platform if there isn't as much Game Pass money in it for them, while sales continue to be the lowest of any platform they publish on? And how are Microsoft's decisions going to impact the profitability of publishing on this platform going forward? For Microsoft, the ultimate goal has been Game Pass user acquisition since the service was introduced. They were forecasting 100 million users by 2030, and while the numbers are currently underneath their targets, it still is the goal to sell gaming as a service to anyone and everyone they can, regardless of platform, on PC, consoles, or mobile, whether it's natively rendered and downloaded or streamed via xCloud to a mobile device or a console. But it remains to be seen just how well they can thread the needle between keeping existing audiences engaged while expanding to new ones on other platforms. Microsoft's situation with Game Pass is an interesting and precarious one. They need to grow users by pushing software everywhere, as they've started to do with their first 4 titles, which helps them grow their potential customer base for software, but not risk alienating their current users to such a degree that they migrate to other ecosystems entirely and force the hands of the publishers and developers who are already questioning why they put their games on the platform in the first place, given the decreased sales footprint. One of the key things I'll be looking out for this year at Microsoft's showcase, during what would be their usual E3 showcase timing, is just how many games from third parties are announced for Game Pass going forward. I speculated a lot in this video on what I believe to be some headwinds coming to the platform based on Microsoft's actions and comments that Chris Dring and Casey Yano have spoken to. But Microsoft's PC side of the business, and their ultimate goal for Game Pass though, is to sell the service everywhere. It may be that there is an understanding that the console side of the business will continue to be a smaller footprint for them, much in the way that physical games have been for the industry at large, but that digital sales of their service and digital sales of their games will continue to thrive as they exist everywhere, as they exist in more and more places for more and more consumers, and that the overall bottom line being greater, given the increased software sales, is enough for Microsoft and its goals. That's going to do it for me, guys. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.